Well, hello and welcome to another JavaScript demo. This is focusing on using session storage and JS files in order to share features between different pages of a website. And although we're sharing simple information back and forth here to deal with background color information, it could be extended to be almost anything, such as shopping cart information going from page to page, or user account information, things of that nature. So there are broad implications to this otherwise simple demo. Let's move on and take a look at some of the subtopics. The application will, as I mentioned, allow a user to decide the background color of the site and then stick with that as you change from page to page. And that's where session storage is going to be coming in. And then we're going to also indicate on the page in text form what the current background color is. And so we'll get a chance to see how to change text on a page. And then we're also indicating if there's no background set, we'll also be detecting and indicating that. And also we're going to look into some just introductory security concerns you may have with JavaScript when you're taking information from the user and ending up, placing it into the page, such as what you might be with a user's name, or in this case, the color. And just talk about some of the vulnerabilities there and how you might counter them in your JavaScript. So those are the features that we'll be focusing on, and let's see the solution application in the browser to see exactly what these features look like in action. Okay, so here is our solution homepage, very generic looking homepage, and we have a shop page also. Also very generic looking products being sold here, and we can just kind of bounce back and forth between these two pages. And if you can share information between two, you can share between whatever. So that's why we just have a simple two-page website here. And of course these buttons have been used instead of links just because we want to show off our JavaScript muscles and be able to react to a click event of the buttons and change the location with JavaScript. Otherwise we'd just use normal links. So here also is the main feature of changing the background color. So you can see when you first open the page initially, you see it says set background color on the button. It's got a text box for you to type in the color you desire, and it says no background color chosen. So we'll keep our eye on this interface here as we make some changes and go from page to page. Let's just change the background by typing in yellow and clicking on the set background color button. And you see that very brightly, no mistaking that it is now yellow. You can also notice these changes. The button now says change background color. It used to say set background color when there wasn't one. Now it says change it, and the current background color is reported here in the text of the sidebar area as yellow. Now if we go to the shop page, we see that it picks up the color. It also says change background color and reports the current color being yellow. So it's picking up that value from session storage. Session storage was set as part of what happens when you click on that change background color. Now if I change the color here on the shop page, let's go to something a little more easy to look at, beige. It's just an off-white. You can see the white backgrounds on other areas, so you can see that it is a beige color. It says change background color and current color beige, and then if we go home, it picks up that change from the shop page. So the communication goes on every page. And now, interestingly, if we choose no background color, in other words, we type nothing in there and say we want to change it, it goes back to its generic white background, and it goes back to saying set instead of change because there isn't one currently, and then it says no background color chosen. So you can see that it's kind of the button itself reacts to the current state, the text reacts to the current state as well, and whatever the current state is on one page, it's picked up and modeled on the other page. Okay, so those are the features that we're looking to code from our starting point to get to this stage. So let's go ahead now and go to the editor. Okay, so now we're in brackets, which is my code editor, and I'm looking at the index.html or home page. Basically the same page we were just looking at in the browser, except for this is obviously missing the code that these functions are going to need to have in order to create that behavior we saw a moment ago. So two main functions here. One is going to change the background color and one is going to show the background color. Let's clarify the difference. So the change background color is going to be what gets called when the button is clicked, and the show background color is going to be called when the page is first being loaded, or if you go back to that page through the navigation of the site. So we'll clarify a little bit more about the differences between them and how those are going to work together. And let's scroll down and take a look at some other important aspects of the HTML. First of all, we're going to focus on this left-hand side. You can see on line 52 of the beginning of a div for the main part of the page, and that's kind of the generic part that we don't have to worry about. And what we're looking at here is the left-hand side of the page, so this is where all the action is for us. First of all, we have the two buttons where we're navigating from page to page, and we see we have these buttons. This is go to home page, go to shop page, and here's the on-click events coded right in the HTML tags themselves. And we're changing location.href to the desired page that we want to go to. So that code is already there. Pretty much the rest of the code is up to us to write. But we do have also the setup on the left-hand side where it says type a background color, and then right below that we have the text box for the user to type into, and then we have the button that the user clicks that says set background, set page background initially. That later gets changed to change page background, as we saw once a background does get set successfully. And we have an on click event already coded in there, and that click event is going to activate that change background color, change BG color. So that's the second function. So that's being called after, for example, the user types in yellow and clicks that button. So this gets activated there, and it's supposed to do the following: get user input of the color from the text box. We'll use get element by ID for that. We have an ID on that text box. We'll see that in a moment. Then we're going to set the color into session storage at that point so that other pages will be able to see it. And then, of course, actually display that color on the page's background. And then set or change what the button says or what the text says to reflect that new color setting. So there's a number of things that need to be done there. Actually, we don't really want to do all of that in this one function, so we have a helper function, show BG color, that we'll be calling upon to do some of that work as well. But let's get started now. Initially, I do want to see that we have this ID on the text box. So we have an ID on the text box, txt BG color, and then we have an ID on the button itself, because we're going to have to change its value as well, btn BG color. So same basic name, txt on the text box, btn on the button. Alright, so that should help us later when we have to get element by ID on those. So let's begin writing our code for this change background color. So the first thing that we'll do is what it says here: get the user input of the color from the text box. So we're going to set up a variable to hold the color. We'll call that BG color, and we'll set that equal to whatever the value is in the text box. So that's going to be a document dot get element by ID, and the ID we just looked at is txt BG color, and then we're going to use the dot value property to get what was actually typed. So we're just taking whatever was typed in the text box and we're putting it in our variable BG color. So next I want to set that value of the color into session storage. So we could use local storage or session storage. Local storage will hang around a lot longer and will remain after the tab has been closed and the browser's been closed, and days later it's still there. We don't really need that level of permanence, so we're just going to use session storage. And the main two methods that we see used with session storage are set item and get item. It's when you're setting something, a value, into the storage for later and then getting it out when you need it. So here we're setting it, and we're going to set first parameter to set item is the name of the variable you want to set into session storage, and I'm going to call that BG color. And then the second one is the actual value for it. Now it's a string also. This is the variable name and this is the string. So this could be a string variable or a quoted string. In our case it's going to be a string variable because we want the color that was typed into the text box to be the value of BG color, the name. You don't have to have them reflecting each other's names. You could just call this color, for example, and that'd be fine. So what's being set into session storage is the name of the variable, so we can get it later using that same name, and then whatever its current value is here. And of course we want to get to the other page and be able to pull that out using the same name and pick up the color, whether it's yellow or beige or whatever. Okay, so those are two important statements. Get the color out of the text box, put it into session storage. So those are the first two steps. Now the rest, there's actually quite a bit to do here still. The main thing, of course, is to get that color onto the page's background. But we also have to be concerned about setting the text appropriately on the page, and maybe adjusting the button as text as well, and maybe consider some security issues related to some of those activities. So let's just bypass all that for the moment, and let's just focus on getting that background color onto the page. To do that, first of all, we're going to be changing the body's CSS background color, right? It's, if you want to set the page's background, it's really the body tag that we're setting. Now the body tag is right here on line 33. There's a couple ways to handle this. I could give it an ID, and if I do, then I can use getElementById to get my hands on the body. I've got to get my hands on the body element itself so that I can then change its CSS. The other way to get it, if you're not going to use getElementById, you can just use getElementByTagName, because there is only one body. So you don't have to worry about this big array of, you know, paragraphs or something and trying to figure out which one you want. There's just one body, so we know if we get elements by tag name, it's going to be the only one. So we're going to do that. We're going to create a variable called body, and that's going to be an object that equals the body element. We're going to do document dot. You can use getElementById if we want to put an ID in there, but I'm just going to demonstrate, flex our array muscles a little bit here and try getElementsByTagName. Now by definition, getElementsByTagName is always going to return an array, even if it's an array of one item. So if I do this and stop that statement there, what I'm actually getting is not a body element, but an array of body elements, but there's only one item in the array. So I think what we really want is just the body element itself, so I can index into that array with the 0th item, and that'll pull the one that it gets out. And so I no longer have an array, I just have that one element. Okay, you can always do that with the body, because there's only going to be one body element, right? So there's my body. Now I can change the style or CSS of that body. So whether, and of course any variable name could be used here, X or whatever. Body dot style, because it is CSS that I'm getting into. Every element has a style property that you can reference there, and then dot and then whatever style, whatever CSS property you want to change. And you can see brackets gives me a nice long list of various CSS properties that we could change, but all I really want to change is background color. And instead of the dash, if you're wondering, if you're familiar with CSS and you're wondering about background color, here is normally a dashed lowercase c, but a dash causes confusion in JavaScript because it looks like a minus sign, and so we have to adjust some of those multi-word CSS properties as such. Alright, so we're going to set this equal to our BG color. Remember, BG color is a string variable that contains the color that was in the text box. So I want to go BG color here. And again, I'm kind of assuming that the user knows color names appropriately and is giving us a good one. If they don't give us a good color name, then it's going to result in just a default white background. So I'm going to save these changes, and let's use the live preview capability of brackets here, and let's see what happens. So initially, set background color here, alright, and we actually don't get anything on the page in terms of indicating what the current color is, and that's because we haven't written that other function that's going to do that for us. But let's go ahead and type in, any background color we might want to try here. I'll try red. I'll click that. It should activate our current code, and you can see that it is working. So we do have some code out there that's actually functioning, but we're a little featureless still. If we go to the shop page, it's not picking it up because we don't have anything that goes and gets that session. We are setting the session variable, but we're not getting it and using it. So we have to do some more work, quite a bit more work actually, but at least you can start to see now that these elements put together can begin to get the job done. Okay, so what we still need to do, you can see that it's not really working for us in the sense that our pages aren't communicating yet. So we still need to integrate these two functions better. And in fact, what this change background color function really should be focusing in on is not making the actual change. Instead, it should be just setting us up here with the proper session storage value change. Okay, that's really its job. And the displaying of that background should be happening up here. And when would this function be called? Well, it's going to be called actually by this, as well as we'll see when the page loads. So let's get into what this function needs to do. The first thing is it's tasked with doing is to get the desired color from session storage. So think of it this way. This function sets it into the session storage, and then when we go to another page, this function is going to pick it up. So instead of set, we're going to use getItem, and we're going to use the same variable name that we had before, BG color. We could use a different one, but it makes sense to be consistent from function to function if it's keeping the same information. And we're going to do session storage dot get item this time, so set it in one, get it in the other, and then we need to mention the same variables. This is important, that if you called it BG color here, you can call it BG color there. You have to be consistent with, otherwise it's going to not know what variable it's going into session storage and trying to retrieve for you, right? So you might even just like copy and paste if you have a set to the get to make sure that you have the same variable name used there. We can call it whatever we want here. This can be X here, but this can't be X unless this was X. So we need that set and get grabbing the same item. So what it's going to pull out of there is whatever the last set was for that variable name, right? So we could go from page to page to page and keep setting different colors, but the last color that was set in there with a click of that button on the browser's page, that's what we're going to be getting out here. So once we have that color, I really basically need to do this same statement here, which is to get the body in preparation for setting it to that color. Now, here's the issue, that this is going to be called when the page first loads. And when the page first loads, it may or may not have any session storage already placed in there. In other words, there may not be a color in place yet. Right? When we first open the page, it's white and there's nothing set yet. So when you go and try to see if something is set, because of course when the page loads, it doesn't know if it's being loaded for the first time, the 10th time, whatever. So we just have to go check session storage and see if there's anything in there previously set. If there is, we can use it, but if there isn't, then we don't want to just go blindly setting the colors to null or something like that. So we need to put in some checks. So before we set the CSS, we're going to need to use an if to check and see. I'm going to give myself some space there. I'm going to do an if on BG color. So what's BG color? Well, BG color is whatever session storage was set to earlier, I'm getting it. But if it wasn't set to anything, or if it was set maybe to a blank as we saw before, it's got to react. So I want to go ahead and say if it's equal to null. Now when would it be equal to null? If it's not set yet. If a session storage variable has not been set previously and you try to get it, the value returned from session storage is null. And this is how you check for it. So it's important to be able to see how you can check for that situation. Now in our situation, it could also be set, but it could be set to a blank. So that's the second thing I'm going to check. And that's kind of your way of setting yourself back to the initial state of having no background color, which in the browser ends up being white. So here it would be the string with nothing in it. So I'm going to set this up so that we can do something in the case where there is of course is a good color, that would be the else part, and here where there is not a good color set previously. So in that case, I'm going to create the proper text and the button text also for that left-hand sidebar area, based on whether it's a legit color or not. And I'm going to need some variables in order to help me do that. So I'm going to create a variable called div message. So that's just going to be a variable that I use to either say no background color chosen or current background color is, and put that in that left-hand navigation area. So I'm going to set that in either case. And I also need access to the button because I'm going to need to make a change there. So let's also declare that. Now I want to change the button's value. That's how I change what the button says on it. And the two different things it could say are set background color or change background color. Remember, it's set if no current one is there. So set would be what we do here, and change was what we would do here. That's the button text. So I need to get my hands on the button first. That's an easy document dot get element by ID using whatever the button's ID is, and you might remember that that's btn BG color. And so that gives us the button itself, and we can use the dot value to change it. So I've got all my variables set up to go in here and set them one way or the other. Okay, and which you set first doesn't really matter. So if in fact the session storage variable has not been set yet, then my div message should be set to, this is a string of course, so no background color chosen yet, basically, meaning, you know, you're probably going to change it later, but it hasn't been chosen yet. But in the case where we did actually get a value back from session storage, we would set it equal to the actual background color itself. And what's that going to be? Well, we'll just say current background color get that spacing right, and then we'll add BG color to that. So bottom line is, if it's not null or blank, then it must have a value, and that value is what we want to see on the page itself, right? This is going to end up going on to the sidebar area in either case. So that's why I declare it up here, and then I can use it in either place. Okay, next we need to set the button text. So the button's text, in the case where we have no background color chosen, now the text or command that the button shows is button.value. And I'm going to change that to set background color in the case where there is no one currently set. Makes sense. But if, in fact, we do have one set, then instead I'll say change background color. This is for the next clicking, not for the current one, or that might have been just happening, right? This is for the next one. In other words, the user is going to see that on the button for the future when they want to change it to something else, possibly. All right, and then the last thing we need to do is actually set the body's background color like we did before. So I'm just going to copy and paste this guy. It actually needs to go into both locations, right? Because we're changing regardless. Makes sense to use the else one first because we're using that same BG color variable. So we're announcing that that's our current background color. We're changing the button to say change, and then we are actually setting that into place like we did last time. Now the only difference here is that we could get into the if where we don't get a session storage variable set, and the question is, what do we do here? Instead of just setting it to null or blank, we're going to set it back to white. So what we're saying here is, if there's nothing set previously, either because there really hasn't been any change or it was changed to blank purposely, then it really should be white. So we'll go ahead and set that to white. But it really wasn't set to white by typing white into the text box. So we're not saying that white was chosen. Alright, so it's a little subtle difference there. Alright, so now what else do we need to do? Well, just because we have this div message doesn't mean that it's going to display. So when we get outside of the if, we have to display that. So we've set the message appropriately. We need to put it onto the page. And so first of all, we need to know, like, where's it supposed to go on the page? Well, we have a div out there, and that div has a div BG color as its ID. Okay, so what that means is that we can do a get element by ID. Alright, so now we have to get this div message out there. A couple of ways we can do this. We're going to go and pack it all into one statement. We're going to do, we have a div out there on the page, so it's document.getElementById. It has an ID, and the ID, as we've seen before, consistently using that BG color naming conventions for our IDs. So what we have on our hands here is the div, and we want to set our message into that existing div. Initially, at least, I'm going to use inner HTML for that purpose, but we'll discuss as to whether that's a great idea or not. And div message is the variable that we set. Now we either set it to no background color chosen, or we set it to the current background color, which is our variable BG color. But where'd that come from? Well, that came from what was originally typed into a text box. So the user could have typed whatever they wanted into that text box. We haven't really cleaned it up or checked it other than to check it to see if it was set to blank. But it could be set to all kinds of crazy stuff, and then we're putting it into the inner HTML rather recklessly because we have no idea what it really contains. So we might want to search and make sure that it's, you know, of a decent format and appropriate to put out there. And we can look into that possibility and when we get to the browser, which we're about to do. Alright, so we've got this lovely function here with all these activities going on, but the question is, what's going to activate this function? It's not getting called from anywhere, right? And I would say this function needs to be called when the page first loads. But you have to be careful because we're referencing the body and we're referencing the button. We're getting elements by ID and by tag name all over the place. We're putting something into inner HTML. We're assuming all that stuff is rendered already. And it's not going to be rendered already if the page is still loading. So it's a little bit of a cat and mouse game, right? We'd like that page to load up and look nice from the beginning, but we can't go any faster than the page is being loaded, right? We have to wait until the page is loaded before we can access these items. So it's got to, you know, it's actually going to be there like a split second without the information, and then we're going to have to react to it's being loaded and pump that information into there and change those texts and change the color real quick. So the way to do that, there are a couple ways, but one way to just do an onload. So this may be an event that you have not seen before, but when the body loads, it means the page is rendered. So that's a good place to just do things that need to happen once the page is fully rendered and you can feel comfortable in accessing any part of the page, but it's still before the user really sees it because it's so instantaneous, they're not even going to notice the difference. So this is a good spot for us to do this function call. There's another way you can do it as well. You can write a script into the head and just set that up so it takes place there. And in our final project, you'll see that approach. So either way, let's go ahead and call that function. So the function is, again, I want to make sure I don't misspell it. So I'm going to put that call right in there by pasting. So once the page loads, we're going to go right after whatever might be in session storage. Now the only way it's going to be in session storage is if it's already been set, which we're not really doing very properly anyway, right? So we'll see how this works. At least what we should see is some text and button change. So we're saying we are seeing no background color chosen. We are seeing set background color. So it is working. And then if we go ahead and change, let's just use a different color like blue. And then if we refresh the page, we can see it's picking it up there from session storage. We kind of know what it's doing. We go to the shop page though and it's not there. Okay, why is that? Well, these pages really aren't communicating because the JavaScript I'm writing is only on one page. So now comes the question about what do I do? I've got all this code here and I want both pages or maybe all 10 pages of my site to be doing the same thing. So this is where a JavaScript JS file really comes in handy because I really don't want to be copying and pasting all this code around. What I really want to do is just have it in one central place. So let's see how we might want to do that. The easiest way is just to take your code that's common to your other pages. Don't take the script tags, but just take the code inside and cut it out of your main page. Create a new file that you can paste that code into, and then Save that into your same folder, and you can call that file whatever you like, but it needs to have a .js file ending. So I'm just going to call this bg-functions, because those are my background functions I'm putting into this .js. You could put something as a name, pretty much anything you want. Alright, now what happens is we now are in bgfunctions.js. We get some weird errors because it's thinking that there's no calls to the function and stuff like that, and it doesn't recognize that this is code that's going to be inside those pages. So now we need to go to the pages and we need to bring in that JS file. So we do a script tag and we do an src property, almost like an image, and then we reference that JS file. This script really should just be for that one purpose. Okay, you can have other scripts here if you want. You can bring in as many JS files as you like. So where do you place this script here? Anywhere where you want those functions to go. So just think of those functions as literally being brought into this head area right now, like they were a moment ago. So this is appropriate. Now I would also want to copy this script tag with the src in there to any other pages that are going to use it. So here is my shop page. I have a errant script already in there. I'm going to get rid of that and replace it with my own. Now on the shop page, you'll also notice this. There's a separate script. I'm still in the head area, but there's a separate script. And remember how I said you can do a body onload, and we actually did that on the home page, right? We did a body onload. Well, this is another way to do it. So on the shop page, instead, we have a script in the head section, so it is going to get executed right when the page first is loaded. And it's saying window.onload equals function, and that function calls show bgcolor. So there's a couple different ways to basically make the same thing happen at roughly the same time. And for our purposes, these are equivalent. Okay, so now let's take a look at this JS file. So I think show bgcolor is doing pretty much everything it should, except we have a little bit of a question to explore about inner HTML. Now the function change bgcolor, what it does is okay initially when we were first writing it. And what it does is, remember, it changes the actual background color, but it doesn't do any of the adjustments like we just went through on the button and on the sidebar. So what I'm going to do is get rid of these two statements. What it does that's really important is to get the value out of the text box and set session storage appropriately, because this doesn't do that. And then what needs to happen next, remember this is in reaction to the button click, so what needs to happen next is to actually call this function. This is what does all the work of displaying that CSS background change and all the implications about the different possibilities that go along with it. So to change the background color, we're going to pick up the value from the text box that the user wants. We're going to put it into session storage, and then we're going to call this. And what does it do first? It goes into session storage and gets that value. So it's almost like we're passing that value from this function to this function. Now, notice one other thing also that show background color was supposed to do, and that's return the color. So the last statement we should have in here, it doesn't look like we're actually doing anything with that return value, but that is how it was written up. So functions should really return a value of some kind indicating something about their success or failure or whatever that was that they calculated or did. So it makes sense this one might return the string color. That way, if you're calling it, you can always get that information back if you want it, or you can ignore it if you don't want it, which is what we just did here, is basically ignore it. Okay, so Now, a little further discussion on inner HTML. I talked about the security concern. Let's save all. Keep in mind, you can't preview a JS file. You have to be on one of your normal pages. So let's go ahead and take a look at what the security issue might be. So if we go to the browser here, and of course we should probably go ahead and set a color and just make sure that that's coming through the shop page. And if we change something there, maybe light blue I think is a legit color. Come back home. So it seems to be functioning perfectly well. We're getting the correct messages out here in the div and in the button itself. But I want to put something out here. So let's say that we want to do something like, we could type in anything we want, like this app sucks. Okay, if I type that in and I make that the background color, it actually comes out here and says current background color, this app sucks. So obviously, it's going to take whatever you type and put it out there. Now what's interesting beyond that is I can actually add HTML into it and change that to an H1. Now what happens? This app sucks as an H1. So you can see that if you can do that, you could also probably throw a script in there or throw other things in JavaScript in there. So it's a little dangerous. Now, it's not that dangerous here when you're just on your own site. It's not affecting, the website out there in reality that lots of different people, you're only messing with your own version of the browser. So it's not so dangerous, but there are other dangerous things that can come from what's called injection. You can look it up. There are all kinds of security concerns about it, especially if you're actually putting, user information into a database. Then the types of injections that can occur on the actual web server can be pretty dangerous. So you want to be thinking about that. And one way to do it is, in our case, one way to lessen the danger of them being able to put HTML right into our document would be maybe don't use inner HTML, because there really isn't any HTML that we're putting in there, right? It's just text. So you can use inner text. And that way, if it is HTML, it won't get acted upon. So if we save this, and again, the nice thing about making little changes to a JS file is all the pages pick it up, right? We're not just changing something on one page. So let's try that same little trick. We'll try to throw an H1 in here. So I'm thinking I'm going to get this big, large text, and now it doesn't treat it as HTML. It doesn't read the tag and actually do it. The browser sees it as just text and not as actual HTML to act upon. So it kind of neutralizes the effect, and that's what you could at least do as an attempt to combat the dangers of security there that might be in place. Now, a better approach would probably be to take the color that comes out of the text box originally and clean it up, right? Search for left bracket, right bracket tags and stuff like that and remove them. Basically clean the text before you try to use it. It takes a little more sophisticated, regular expressions or search and replace type features within strings to be able to do that. So we're not going to go any further with that discussion. But I just want to raise your awareness about security and types of things that can happen. If you're curious, just look into SQL injection and what kind of bad things can happen on your web server when users are able to do that type of stuff in your forms. Alright, so we've seen quite a bit of different attempts to share information between pages, and I think this is a really good JS file solution. Anytime you have functions that or even variables that need to be shared, that you can do so through session storage, through local storage, or through JS files when you have functions that need to be shared across multiple pages. So I hope you found this useful, and thanks for watching.